Here we go. Thank you for the teaching. Welcome to our afternoon session. Over the past 75 years, Death of a Salesman has established itself as one of the most studied American plays in high schools, colleges, and universities. So our next two sessions focus on the teaching and learning aspects of the play. We begin this teaching session with reading by Keenan Cole.
Thank you for having me. I just want to make sure, can you all hear me back there? Okay, great. I know there's a live stream, so, yeah, okay. Okay,
It
okay.
would be better if you did, but if you just project.
I will do my best. I can put it. Okay. All right. So during Death of a Salesman's first year on Broadway, Arthur Miller received over 1,000 letters related to the play. A February 1950 New York Herald Tribune article noted, many of these letters are from salesmen, but a large number are from other groups, ranchers, stockbrokers, and jailbirds, as well as from salesmen's wives. The article recounted the long journey of a former gold miner who traveled by bus from California to Roxbury to share his own life story. Barbara Beebe was a 19-year-old student at the University of Richmond in the fall of 1949 when she wrote to Arthur Miller for a journalism class assignment. She had never seen the play. Her letter does not survive, but its questions clearly resonated with the 33-year-old playwright. And we just want to take a moment to thank Barbara and her daughter, Julie Moon, for saving this letter in response. Dear Miss Beattie, if there is a formal genesis of Death of a Salesman, it is certainly in the Elizabethan drama, particularly Shakespeare. From the point of view of form, I've long felt that the spaciousness of his plays has been forfeited for a physical concentration which contradicts life itself. I've learned from him, if you will, that words themselves are the best scene setting, that it is not necessary to devise elaborate plot machinery in order to set a scene, which itself can explain itself. In short, to proceed to the meat of a scene at once and to make it happen where and when it logically would happen, and not where a stationary setting forces it to happen. As well, my form is one which permits time for what in effect are soliloquies. As I see it, the force of Elizabethan form lay in its ability to follow the mental processes of its protagonists, wherever they might lead. The same may be said of mine. This cannot be said of the realistic form called Ibsen's, which itself imposes upon the story and the characters instead of following them, making way for them. In such plays, incredible ingenuity and much time is wasted in the mere effort to justify the simple meeting of two characters. One may fairly say that in our day, this form has come to be a word game, in which the confrontation of characters is made to seem natural or real. Of course, it is actually a severe form of stylization whose utter unreality and unnaturalness is shrouded by sets with windows that work, rugs on the floors, and so forth. Thus, the means employed actually stand as an obstruction between the vision of the playwright and the emotional receptivity of the audience. For we do not dream or inwardly think in such terms, but otherwise. We dream in scenes, don't we? But the preparation for these scenes is direct, immediate, and contained in the scenes themselves. There is no maid who enters and talks to a butler who between them inform us that our father is about to return home after a year's absence. We suddenly see our father, and in what he does and says lies all relevant information about his situation. Plays written in this fashion therefore proceed with true naturalness, from relevancy to relevancy without sparring about. Concerning the idea of Elizabethan tragedy and my own, I could speak for many hours. Central to Shakespeare's tragedy is the idea of the fall, which implies social stature of a royal level. I too see the fall as a critical aspect of tragedy, but our world has changed, and it is no longer possible to think of the fall as that of a socially elevated person exclusively. But social status, to my mind, was and is only a superficial expression of a deeper fall, so to speak. Namely, the destruction of a man's idea of what he is by forces opposing him. Any class is thereby given entrance to the precincts of the tragic, and it is so in a democratic society. Under Elizabethan feudalism, this notion was unthinkable, if only because none but the royal had the alternatives of seemingly absolute choice, the liberties of the masses being hedged about by all sorts of rigid prescriptions. Today, we are all free to aspire to any height. We have the hero's necessary alternatives. My moral object, therefore, is to attempt to direct the efforts of men toward the clear appreciation of reality, exploring the illusory in order that man may realize his creative potentialities. In another context, Shakespeare was attempting the same thing, as in the history plays, where the catastrophe derives from the impossible ambitions of the monarch, or those of the subjects against the monarch. A certain order is therefore implied as having been violated in his work and in mine. His idea was futile. It supposed that life would be good when men behaved in accordance with their social position and neither lapsed into a lower level, Prince Hal, nor created havoc by attempting to crash into the one above them, the king in Hamlet. My ideal order is less easy to formulate, if only because it does not yet exist, while Shakespeare was writing within a society whose theory was sufficient for him. I see man's happiness frustrated until the time arrives when he is judged, given social honor and respect, not by what he has accumulated, but what he has given to his society. This ideal is posited not for itself, but because I know the frustration of the creative act is the cause of our hatred for each other, and hatred is the cause of our fears. We reward our dealers, our accumulators, our speculators. We penalize with anonymity and low pay our teachers, our scientists, our workers who make and do and build and create. And so the urge that is in all of us to give and to make is turned in upon itself, and we accept the upside down idea that to take and to accumulate is the great good. And whether we succeed in that or not, we are sooner or later left with the awareness of our emptiness, our inner poverty, and our isolation from mankind. When man reaches that knowledge and has the sensitivity to feel the loss of his true self deeply, he is a tragic figure. But not unless he tries to find himself despite the world, can you raise up in us the actual feeling that something fine and great and precious has been discovered too late. The history of man is his blundering attempt to form a society in which it pays to be good. The tragic figure now, and always, is the man who insists, past even death, that the stultifying combination of evil give way before the outpouring of humanity and love that is bursting from his heart. This is why tragedy endures, and this is why it has never really changed, excepting in its superficial aspects of rank, etc. I hope some of this has been clear. I write at such length because there are not many who have taken the trouble to examine the matter at all. Sincerely yours, Arthur Miller.
I turn it over to Jean Dominic, who will moderate the session.
Hi. Welcome to the teaching salesman panel. In the time I've been involved with the Art Auxiliary Society since its founding 3 decades ago, one element has continued to stand out to me from the start. the value and focus Miller scholars place on their teaching and their students, interested in introducing them to Miller's works and other dramatists and writers, fostering their studies and ideas, and encouraging them in their educations, degrees, and careers. As some of you might know, this is not always the case with professors and scholars. In addition to their keen interest in all things theatrical, seeing as many productions as possible, and participating as dramaturgs and leading talkbacks, what I've also noticed with pleasure is the Society's members' interest in high school teachers and their students, many of us having taught high school as well. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce you to this panel that embraces and connects all three sometimes disparate groups as these 8 teachers and theater practitioners present and discuss their approaches to teaching the works of Arthur Miller, and in particular today, Death of the Salesman. So as we did this morning, we'll go ahead and follow the order in your program. And I've asked that each member present a few minutes of their ideas. Yes.
Just make sure you talk into the microphone, otherwise they can't hear you at home or streaming.
So they didn't hear what you said.
Correct.
We don't need to do it again.
No, it's okay.
So first we have Joshua.
Oh crap, I have to find out Arthur Miller?
Yes. You'll do a
I've
fine-
never written a student response like that.
You'll do a fine job. And microphone good.
Is it on? Good.
You can turn off the speaker.
There's no. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, but for the lights.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
I'm working? There it is.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Bolster, and I've taught Death of the Salesman to high school students, college students, and students who are incarcerated. And I'm just going to hone in on the latter. I've taught specifically at the Massachusetts Correctional Institute in Concord and Norfolk. And in fact, I was at Norfolk a week ago on Friday teaching Death of a Salesman, so this is pretty fresh for me. And with this play, it proves a particular challenge because I'm in a medium security prison, all like around 21 all male students that are working towards their bachelor. And I would say, and I asked, none of them heard of this guy named Arthur Miller before, and they never heard of Death of a Salesman before. So for me, that was actually a welcome challenge because it is a challenging play. So one of the things that I help them with via Death of a Salesman is how to read a play, because that's something that they have less practice with, and we learn how to approach it differently than, say, one would read a novel. And for example, when you read a play, you need to kind of like produce it in your mind, right? You have to be the casting director, for example. So one of the things that we do, and one of the things we interrogate is who is your Willie Loman? Who is your Loman family? And so much like the excellent presentation that Sue gave us, we look at different productions and is your Willie Loman Lee Cobb, or is your Willie Loman Wendell Pierce? And by doing so in advance, it helps bring Death of the Salesman closer to the students. So from more of a Latinx background can resonate with it more because they see how it connects more to their lives and to their family. And we've had really powerful connections, how people say, like, that's my grandfather's life right there. And we're talking about a group of men that come from multiple different races, ethnicities, and religion. And very few of them say this is, I see this as a kind of like a white Jewish guy. It actually doesn't go in that direction. So I think the lack of specificity in terms of race and ethnicity really helps create the universality of the play and teaches students how they can make plays like Death of a Salesman more of their own. And then the other hurdle, I will say, but a joyous hurdle, is just the avant-garde style, expressionism. It's not something that students are familiar with, right? So one of the ways I approach the play is like we look at other expressionist artists, we look at expressionist paintings, right? To understand how, some of the scenes in the play are not cinematic flashbacks, right? These are like when we see Biff and Happy in their younger states, that these are moments that are happening in real time, but in Willie Loman's noggin. And that takes a little bit of getting used to, and it's hard to see that on the page, right? So we have those kinds of conversations, and it helps them just really understand the play better, and also at the same time helps them appreciate it better. And we've had some just brilliant conversations in terms of how to see this play differently in each of the students' minds. And Steve asked us recently to consider why is salesman important today. And I can verify all the times I've taught this play in various different settings that it just powerfully resonates into the 21st century. And I have no doubt that it will continue to do so. Thank you.
Next we have Jan Balakian.
Okay, I had a full-blown lecture, so I'm going to be pulling from it. Forgive me if it's fragmented. But my students in New Jersey are the first to go to college in their families, and they hope that their diploma is their ticket to financial security. And so many of them have chosen to become teachers. Others want to become as rich as they can, as fast as they can, and why not? They hear, however, that the play says that making money and being successful are unethical. So how do I sell this play? If my student evaluations are bad, I don't get promoted, and I'm only as good as my last class. So what do? I take them straight to the scene where Willie is fired. And for students new to literature, it's a perfect exercise in how metaphor and irony create meaning. I break students into groups. One focuses on the distinction between Howard and his father. A second thinks about the tape recorder as metaphor. When Howard says, I'm going to take my camera and my bandsaw and out they go. This is the most fascinating relaxation. Their assignment is to reflect on the particular sounds and statements that Howard has recorded on it. The whistling of the World War II song, Roll Out the Barrel. Howard's son reciting the capitals of the U.S., Howard's daughter saying it's full of a watch time, and then there's the bleep in the tape recorder because the maid kicked the cord. A third group looks up Jack Benny, which is also mentioned on the tape recorder, and a fourth reports on the Dave Singelman story that convinced Willie to go into sales. And then finally, there's a group that presents their thoughts about the map of the U.S. And actually, I think I'm not completely accurate. It's the map of New England, but I like to think of it as the map of the U.S. in the Dustin Hoffman production. So those presentations happen, and I weave into this that Miller told me when I was just stumbled onto Dumb Luck and talked to him in 1989. I've always felt that there's a fundamental insecurity in Americans, the fear of falling out of the class that they're in. We've seen a whole class of people thrown out into the street, a whole class who no longer have the means to rent space in the city, and in some people it makes them more greedy. So like many Americans being laid off, Willie feels the panic of being without a paycheck. The moment that comes up in student presentations is the year that Al Smith was nominated. And so they discover that Al Smith was the Democratic politician in New York State. And we end up talking about a more humane America versus Howard's more rugged, individualistic America, a kind of ruthless Darwinian America. And so I try to then make the connection to the contemporary election moment. Do we want to vote for a humane solution for America, or do we want to vote for tax cuts for the rich? So we bounce the play back and forth between our current moment. Let's see. When Willie says promises were made across this desk, but we never learn what those promises were. First, because Howard gets up in the middle of the conversation, and next, because Willie accidentally hits the tape recorder. And then we again hear the recitation of the capitals of the US. Then we move to the idea that selling is loosely metaphorical for any pursuit. And I actually throw it back on students and I say, well, is there an analogy between the Howard Willie firing situation and student-teacher relationship? If a student performs below average work, do we pass them? They need a C in order to enter our teaching program. So would we be thwarting their future career if we grant them the C that they earn? And what about standards? So then there's that debate. Is there a difference between Willie's situation of being at a company for 34 years and other kinds of firing or evaluations? And should loyalty transcend performance? Shouldn't people be awarded according to their productivity? Not to take too much time, but we move to then Miller's idea of a social poetic theater and the connection between society and individual. And students ask, well, how can you fuse individuals with the welfare of society? So then we open up to time bends and we read to them about Miller's discovery of Marxism. And they're kind of stunned by that. And so I like to finally end our conversation after they do all these presentations that are rich with there's more of Willie in that front stoop than in all the sales he ever made, one of the most famous lines, and ask students to think hard about what they want to do with their lives. What do they want to do rather than what they think they should want to do? And they do a free write on that. And so it ends up in the end being about the students and how they want to build their front stoops. And then the bigger conversation also about, what kind of America do we want? Do we want a Howard's America or do we want FDR's America? And so that's just a glimpse.
Thank you.
Daphne?
Okay. Okay. So I retired from the University of Connecticut 5 years ago. And at the time, I was teaching, among other things, a course in modern drama. And I began with a quote of Miller's: "The mission of the theater, after all, is to change, to raise the consciousness of people to their human possibilities." So, and change the world he did, as we know. He changed it along with Lorraine Hansberry and Lynn Nottage, who dealt with the vanishing, if it ever existed, of the American dream and the falsehoods it presented to the common everyday worker, white and people of color. All three playwrights saw theater, as Nottage wrote, quote, "a powerful social art designed to instigate and unsettle and ultimately pry people out of their complacency." And if you don't know that Nottage wrote the introduction to one of to the collected plays of Arthur Miller. So among other plays for a semester, I would teach Death of a Salesman, Raisin in the Sun, and Nottage Sweat. These plays looked at the American dream with all its flaws and failures and its emphasis on a good work ethic, supposedly as a way to success. So I would ask students, what are the roles of money, materialism, capitalism, class, and race in these plays? And above all, what does a loss of dignity do to all these characters? And I can't emphasize enough the loss of dignity. Now, I discovered when I was reading a recent, somewhat recent biography study of Lorraine Hansberry, that they referred to an article which was sort of difficult to find, that was in the Village Voice, August 12th, 1959, when Lorraine Hansberry, the article was called An Artist's Reflection, Willie Loman, Walter Lee, and Who Must Live. So I thought, well, okay. Now, it was like reading microfiche, and I know some of you don't know what microfiche is, but I have basically one better eye, so it was difficult, but successful and worth looking up for yourselves. In that article in the Village Voice, she said, something has indeed gone wrong with at least part of the American dream. And Willie Loman is a victim of the detour. I thought that was a fascinating choice of words. Victim, we all know, but as a victim of the detour of the American dream. And one last point, in Nottage's introduction to the collected plays, again, I would invite you, if you're not familiar with Sweat, to read Nottage play Sweat in conjunction with Raisin in the Sun and Death of a Salesman. But in that collected plays, the title is Letter to a Young Playwright. She said, I learned my craft by reading the plays of Miller, and his plays probe the complexities of a flawed society, and he wrote with empathy for the disaffected souls that hovered at the edge of darkness. And so the eloquence of her comment about Miller should lead you to read Sweat. Thank you.
Thank you. So I come from the high school level. I recently retired, taking a deep breath away from public education. I come from a system that does not have theater education as a class. So students would read Miller in my English class. And it's very different experience on stage reading Death of a Salesman and practicing versus a classroom of sweaty 25 kids with no window and all different learning levels. So I come from a place of teaching from honors, college bound, reading difficulty. So today I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about how I approach it with struggling readers. Because of the abstract nature of Death of a Salesman, it could be a true challenge for a teacher to have students, and I'll talk particularly about one class I have in mind, of 16 boys who are struggling to read, understand the dynamic of Willie's mind. So when I teach Death of a Salesman or taught Death of a Salesman, what I did was I framed my entire year of 11th grade American literature around Arthur Miller. So I'd begin the year with The Crucible and end with Death of a Salesman. And you really think about it, it's a very depressing way to end a year. However, I didn't do it without reason. So typically junior year is a year where everyone asks students, what are you doing? Where are you going? Making the assumption everyone has to be, the best. So two things that I primarily use. I get to really know my students that whole year. So I know exactly who should play Willie. I know exactly who's to play Biff, exactly who's to play Happy, and so forth. I typically, in a class of struggling readers, I would end up being Linda. And that was okay with me. Again, it's an English class. They're writing, they're reflecting, we're talking, we're discussing, we're stopping every 2 pages to understand what's happening. The invisible walls, the flute, the flashback, what's really happening. You really have to unpack it. So I thought it was beneficial most of the time to play Linda in a class of all boys. And so I would use my intuition in assigning students the different roles. And then we would pause and reflect. Every class that I had was a little bit different on where we'd pause to reflect, but it mostly was in those big choice moments or those foreshadowing moments. So pausing and reflecting and saying, okay, among pages 5 through 10, what stood out to you most and why? I always gave the option for students to share because it's so personal. And that brings me to the next reason why I was so passionate about teaching this play, because it's reflective of the human experience. You see yourself or your loved ones in every character at some point in your life, whether you're 16 or you're 85. You've felt like Linda, or you've experienced someone in your life like Linda, or any of the characters. Maybe you've watched a loved one be the Willie Loman of your life. You cannot dive into this work right away if you don't know your students, because my students were captives. They didn't elect to be with me. They didn't elect to be in my room. So when you teach something so profound, you have to lead with your heart. And so by showing that you care about Willie, your kids are going to writing the reflection, that empathy, and you build that empathy. And I will say that now I know that it's intimidating and scary post-COVID for a lot of young teachers. So they are not teaching it necessarily in the public high schools any longer. I can tell you that. And that is one of the reasons I'm here, is because I want to be a voice for Death of a Salesman and be a voice for Arthur Miller. He belongs in the classroom, and especially among your struggling learners, especially among students who have high stakes lives. And so that's really important for me to be here. And students who don't get to experience it don't recognize how liberating it actually can be. And to end with, I had a student who, because of this play, the whole time we're reading the play, he's sharing with the class the conversations he's having at home with his father about joining the military. And his father was against it. You don't want to join the military. You don't want to join the military. And his father kept saying no. And by the end of us reading this play, he had the courage to say, Dad, I'm doing it, with your support or not. And his father supported him. And I like to say it's because of this play. And so leading with heart and intuition is really the way you have to go about it, because knowing that your audience is captive, you got to make the most out of it. And this is the play. So at the end of the year, the final assignment would be to pair it with A Raisin in the Sun. And their exam would be choose 2 characters, one from each play, put them in a room. And most of the time it was Willie and Walter Lee. So ode to Lorraine Hansberry, love her. And so they make a great pairing. So thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Marla Truini. I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you all so very much. My connection with Death of a Salesman began when I studied the play as a high school junior at the Hewitt School in New York City. Our teacher, Mrs. Delman, loved the theater, and she instilled her love of theater in all of her students by offering dramatic work in the classroom, and then also by taking us on weekend field trips down to Greenwich Village and Hell's Kitchen to see off-Broadway productions of plays. And this formative experience led me to a career as an actor, and then after moving here to Roxbury, as a theater educator. The first play that I ever directed as a high school theater teacher at the Westover School in Middlebury was Arthur Miller's The Crucible. And my students were so enthusiastic about the play that the following year, I offered a semester-long course on the plays of Arthur Miller. And my approach was to have my students read the plays out loud in class. We read 9 plays, starting with All My Sons and ending with The Ride Down Mount Morgan. And it was an exciting experience to read the plays and to hear all these young voices, girls' voices, because it's a girls' school, embodying Miller's characters. Reading the plays chronologically, we were able to notice threads of dramatic form, theme, structure, and motif. And some years later, I was hired as an adjunct professor at Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon, and I offered a similar curriculum, but this time it was to upper-level undergraduate college students. And at the college level, we moved at a similar pace, but I was able to challenge the students with the addition of a one-act play. So we added a memory to Mondays. We also read the screenplay of The Misfits and the teleplay of Playing for Time. And again, the course was conducted in a seminar format with in-class readings of the plays. And as students read the plays aloud in class using a guided technique, they heard their own voices in Miller's characters, providing a really unique opportunity to participate actively in the exploration of the material. For a little bit of context on the guided technique that I used, students are encouraged to stop frequently, as you had mentioned also, Shannon, for context, clarity, and connection. We also added, for each reading, a student volunteered to read the stage directions, so we were clear where we were. And then another student took the role of the scribe, and so people didn't have to take notes during the whole class. The scribe took all the notes, and we shared all those notes in a shared Google Doc. So we used technology using the Google Doc, which worked out really well because then the class notes were used by all the students as they began their written assignments. Now, I wanted to mention that reading plays aloud in a class may offer some special challenges to students who are multilingual or non-native English speakers. And so, although at that time I didn't have students in that category in my classes, if I were to offer the course again, I would be thoughtful about accommodating these students because we want to include everybody. So some ways that I might do that would be to include a pre-course survey, so I'd understand the level of comfort of using the English language and reading aloud. I would also provide opportunities for students to pre-read the material and conference with me if they need that. And then translated versions of the plays, which I think are readily available, and then audio and video recordings so that it could help them with comprehension. As we examined the social and political context and the significance of the controversial aspects of the plays, students were encouraged to ask questions and to share their personal responses. And an additional benefit to reading a playwright's body of work is to explore biographical elements of the playwright's life and times, their connections to characters, plots, and themes. And our lively class discussion offered many opportunities to hear a range of perspectives and to share what resonated and what we reflected in community together. I hope to offer this kind of class again, perhaps in a community setting such as a library or senior citizen center. So stay tuned for possibilities that Arthur Miller's plays continue to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. When I was invited to join this section, I was a little concerned because of two things. I don't know what the situation is in this country. Bear in mind, I come from Spain. Everything is now about how to teach and nothing at all about what you teach. And I'm profoundly upset with the developments of education in the later years, towards a point in which it doesn't matter what you teach as long as you teach it in the right way. And for moments, I thought that this segment was going to be about the hoods and treasure hands and how to devise games to teach death of a salesman. And if that were the case, I wouldn't know what to say or what to do. But fortunately, it is not the case. So I deeply appreciate you all addressing the play for what it is and for what it tells us, rather than on what newfangled new methodology we can use to teach it. That is one thing. The other thing is that, curiously enough, I'm going to say something that may surprise you. I try as much as I can not to teach Death of a Salesman. It's not at all my favorite play to teach. As a matter of fact, sometimes I do it because I feel it's almost an obligation, but not because I enjoy it. The reason being that I like the play very much. And I don't think that liking a play very much is always a good element of your toolkit when it comes to teaching it. Sometimes you need a certain distance from a play. I mean, something that doesn't touch you so deeply to be able to teach something really well. I spent 2 years writing and preparing an annotated edition of Death of a Salesman and translating it into Spanish. So that essentially meant that I spent 2 years working on Death of a Salesman, 8 hours a day on every single comma of the play. And when that is the case, I mean, to think that now you have to go and also teach Death of a Salesman feels like, isn't there another play I can teach? And then there's something else. I mean, since I am supposed to know the play so well, if I teach the play and students look at me like, well, I am going to feel doubly humbled by that. I mean, if it's a play I'm not so familiar with and I don't do a very good job, I can at least think, well, it was not a play that I knew so well. With this play, I mean, it's a huge responsibility, I mean, to do a good job. That being said, and I'm going to finish in a couple of minutes, I'm going to tell you the things that I don't say a word about when I teach Death of a Salesman. I'm not saying that they should not be taught. I'm not against other people teaching them. I'm not saying they're not relevant. I'm merely saying these are things I never mention when I teach Death of a Salesman. The first thing is capitalism. I'm not interested in capitalism in Death of a Salesman. I mean, shoot me if you want. But I don't speak about capitalism when I teach Death of a Salesman. Sorry. I don't speak either about individual responsibility. I understand it's important and I understand it's there, but I don't speak about individual responsibility or tragedy. I'm not interested in speaking about tragedy when I teach Death of a Salesman. Maybe I'm not qualified. Maybe I don't know anything about tragedy to really speak to that. Oh, one more thing I never talk about when I teach Death of a Salesman, the American Dream. Sometimes I think that if someone else tells me about the American Dream one more time, I am going to start doing something wild and crazy. Yeah, don't go away. Don't go away. No, I'm in a peaceful mood today. What else? Oh, the Common Man. The Common Man is something that I don't even know what that is, but I try to avoid that as much as I can. Or the family, the crumbling of the American family. Not interested in that. Sorry, I'm not interested in those things. But I'm interested in something. I wake up.
What argument? What's left?
Yeah, what's left? What's left? Okay. There are a few things left, but I'm only going to speak about one. I wake up in the morning, and from the moment I wake up, I start making choices. Right? What do I have for breakfast? What do I go now? Do I take a shower? Do I wait for later? Do I take a bus to go to school? Do I ride my car? I'm always making choices. And what happens when I make those choices? Well, sometimes I start considering that maybe If I had had that for breakfast rather than this, my stomach would not hurt. Maybe if I had walked to school instead of taking the bus, I don't know, I could have gotten there in a more relaxed manner, etc., etc., etc. But those things don't give me a sense of trauma. Those things don't give me, I don't know, I mean, I don't spend my whole day thinking about all of the things I could have done and didn't. Will on my test. That's really, in my opinion, his strategy. I mean, he's a man that chooses this and spends his whole life thinking about what would have happened if I had chosen this. You can't live that way. This is one of the things that I talk about when I teach Death of a Salesman, and a lot of others. But I think that's enough. Thank you.
Yes, hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You too. Sorry I was a couple minutes late. I apologize. Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Burnham. I'm the Director of Theater Arts at the Frederick Gunn School. And I've been fortunate enough to teach this and work on this play from the higher education level. When I was in Arizona, I taught it with theater history as well as my acting class. And then also we've explored a lot of monologues and scenes in class recently. I approach this play and the work of this in a very, I feel in a very visceral and a very tangible way. I'm interested in looking at the play in the sense of digging into the play, as I call it, Sherlock Holmesing the play, that we get to dig in and look at what are the given circumstances? What do we learn? What do we imagine? What do we think? And I do this by having us all read around in a circle. So I don't divvy up parts or anything. We just go one after another. We just go around. So you might be having a big monologue one moment, and then Happy has a quick line back or something like that. And we go around. So everybody's invested in the reading and the unpacking of the play itself. I love Arthur Miller. I find All My Sons to be one of his greatest plays, if not maybe his best play. And I love exploring that play on many, many different levels. But with Death of a Salesman, I find myself interested in asking students when we read and everything about what does that sound like? What do you hear? What do you imagine? As opposed to what does that mean? I think that gets very, very murky and very muddy, and we all bring our own experiences into that. I'm more interested in what do you hear and what do you imagine? I think words come off the page that way. I think it also includes everybody when we do that. There's not so much risk involved when I ask, what does that mean? That takes a lot of courage and bravery to say what you think that means. And I think for myself, I'm always interested in what does that sound like? What do you think? When we can dig into a play and find the given circumstances and people are Sherlock Holmesing the text, it allows everybody to be included, and it allows the person that can dig into the text and find something and have an aha moment that was overlooked really exciting for the student. It really is when they can find something in there that isn't what they thought. I'm also interested in, we have some nicknames here of Biff and Happy. I approach this from an acting standpoint. I'm a director, I'm an actor. What's playable? What's going on? Why do you think this is? What are the expectations, right? We talk about the expectations that Willie has, that he looks at, and all of these things. And also I talk to the students too about, right now they keep saying that these students are going to have 6 different careers or something like that, with technology changing and everything. And we see that happening now, right? I used AI for the first time last night to write a letter of recommendation. And I wrote the letter and I put it in, and then it spit it out for me, and it was lousy. It was really kind of lousy, and I was really disappointed. I was like, it sounded so awful. But my point is that at some point these things start to change, right? Expectations change, our roles change, and everything that happens. And then when we were pertinent and when we were good at something, maybe no longer that is possible, right? Things change and everything like that. And our memory shifts, and what do we remember and all of that. But for me, I approach this from what is tangible, what do you know, what do we expect, what do we hear from an objective standpoint. What do they want? I'm an acting teacher. What can you play on the page? What can you play? What is active? And I think that's incredibly important as you look at this play, unpack it in any single play that you're looking at, right? What are the given circumstances? What do we learn? And I find that very, very exciting. I find it really exciting when I have an aha moment and I didn't figure that out, and what happens. And as I mentioned, looking at Biff and Happy, what is that? What are those names? What are their, was he born? Is that his name? That his name is Happy? I don't know. I mean, and those kind of things. So we talk about that and the expectations of that, and also brother and family and that kind of role of that as well. So I really do believe in a more beautiful question. So the more questions we can pose, I think, and live in allowing them to explore that and not try to shut anything down, I think is much more exciting place to be in a classroom. So there you go. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I came to this panel as a teaching theater artist. So like Kent had said earlier, you know, I'm an acting teacher, and I think of this play as a tool, right? I think a lot of the things that we teach in the classrooms are tools, whether they are, you know, a math book or I don't even know, a globe. That's not my expertise, I don't know. But in acting class, in theater class, these plays that we read are tools, right? So when I go back to when I was a high school student, and I looked on my high school theater teacher's shelf and I saw this dusty, crusty old book of Death of a Salesman with, you know, the picture with the guy is hunched over and it's like lime green or something. And it's, you know, all the pages were torn and tea stained, all of that. I thought, this isn't for me. That's not me. That's not my story. That's not my play, right? I wanted to do the 5, 6, 7, 8. I wanted to be in West Side Story. I wanted to get Tony Awards. I wanted all of that, right? But then I went to college and I snuck down to New York City on a Friday night and I saw the revival that Brian Dennehy did. A lot of people saw that, right? And I stood for those 3 hours in the very, very back. I think I got like $30 tickets. And it was one of the nights that Brian Dennehy stopped because a cell phone went off in the theater. Now, back then, cell phones were new, so it was newfangled technology, right? And and I know this because I read later, he always stopped the play to say, turn off your cell phone, right? And I'll never forget it because like, you know, this snot-nosed kid in the back row being like, oh God, I didn't even have a cell phone at the time, but I remember just feeling so like shook, right? And that, the power of the play and that performance specifically, it changed the way I thought about theater because I thought we're all in this room together, right? Brian Dennehy's in the same room with me and he's telling me this story. And that changed the way that I thought about theater and tools from then on in. So I've had the great fortune, as a lot of theater artists do, to bounce around from gig to gig. It's gig culture when it comes to theater artistry. And I fell in love with teaching because I loved this moment that Kent said about that aha moment. Well, for me, what I love about teaching is when a student goes, oh, that's my heroine right there. That's what's really exciting for me, right? This idea that we can take an old clunker like Death of a Salesman and give it to a new audience, and then they go, oh, this is my story, or this is this I know this. I can relate to this, right? So that's what really gets me excited about this play. And when I was asked to do this panel, I was like, oh, well, I got to talk about that. Oh, because that's exactly why we become teachers. I'm sure all my colleagues on this panel can relate to that, right? So teaching it as a tool for actors. This play is dense, as we've all established, right? But at the center of this play is talking and listening, thinking, right? Relating to each other or not relating to each other. And as actors, oh, that's the stuff, right? That's the stuff we have to unpack, right? So I teach the Biff and Happy scene, you know, in the old bedroom scene. And it's so exciting because when I see young actors, both male presenting or female presenting, kind of in this work, they're all like, oh yeah, I want to scream it. Like I want to, and it's not about screaming, it's about the vulnerability, right? And I think Miller wrote so much about vulnerable men and ways that they could communicate and not communicate. And even though it was written a long time ago, it still resonates today with a young audience, right? I mean, look at this front row right here, right? It still resonates with us because we get to say, oh, I get it. I get this, right? And as a theater teacher now, I teach at an all-boys boarding school, and they're like, Mr. Oliver, I don't want to learn this stuff. Can we just go outside and throw the ball around? I mean, literally, Biff and Happy are taking my class, right? So they're like, this is not my story. This is not. But then as soon as we start reading the stage directions, and the guys are smoking, and they're talking about the date they went on, right? They think, oh, I know what this is. I know how to talk to my brother or my sibling about feeling like I don't have a purpose. I know what this is. And then they go, oh, got it. And I think that's what Miller, was that when Kimie read that really beautiful letter. And I hope we get that. Can we get a copy of that letter somewhere? Yeah, you got it?
No, I'd like to.
Okay.
I think there's a link to it on the Optimilla website.
Great. Well, thank you. I really, because it resonates so much to me that he reached out to a young person who was inspired by this play. And that young person wasn't a male presenting student who was like, oh, I'm definitely Biff, or I'm definitely Happy, or, my father's Willie Loman. It was a female presenting student that said, I really see myself in this. And that is the power of theater. And that is the power of Arthur Miller and this great work. So I'm really happy to be a part of this, and I cannot wait to chat further. Thank you very much.
Wow. And I know that, I know that under or beyond everything that we've heard in about 5 minutes from each of these wonderful educators and theater artists and writers, that there's another whole list of 10 or 20 or 30 things that they could talk about this play. So we've just scratched the surface, but what an incredible variety. I just wanted to start with a couple questions, and then I thought what we'll do is if they have a couple questions, and then I'll open up to all of you very shortly because we have some time, which is lovely. Thank you, panel members, for sticking to the time limit. Doesn't always happen, as we know, especially with teachers. I want me included. Ramon, you brought up something very interesting about the what if I had made a different choice, and I don't know if this is answerable from people's experiences here. And I've been exploring a lot of things, the difference between Americans and say Europeans, to just narrow the world. Do you think that that is more of an American predilection? Because I know I saw my dad do it all the time, make a choice. And then I've gone the other way. So, look at 65 grad schools, choose one, be on the south side of Chicago saying, oh, no, you looked at 65, get back. So I've done it kind of in reverse, not to do the if only I'd made a different choice. There's also a wonderful book published a number of years ago titled The Paradox of Choice, that a lot of our anxiety and depression is based on so many choices. I mean, go to our potato chip aisle. Now, we don't have, we don't have prawn cocktails and, beef and everything, the flavors that England has. But I mean, it's extraordinary. That's just one thing of all the choices. But do you think that at all is an American thing, or is it a worldwide, if only?
You're putting me in a very awkward position because every time I explain the play, probably that's a wrong choice of words. I don't explain the play, but we work in the play. But the first thing I ask my audience of students is there anyone from the United States here? Because if there is, I would never answer the question that's just asked me. And now I realize that I had to repeat something I always say, but in front of an American audience. Fortunately, I'm leaving tomorrow for Spain. So even if you wanted to spell me from the country, I mean,
Yes, but remember, I'll be in Spain soon.
I know. That'll be a big difference. So sometimes I ask them what is America all about? What is America all about? I mean, if we had to choose one word to explain what America is, which one would that be? And of course, students don't get a clue as to what to say, and then I supply an answer. America is all about guilt. There's nothing Americans enjoy more than feeling guilty. And for a society that is so addicted to guilt, what better thing than spending the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if I had done this other thing, if I had not said this, if I had not chosen that?
Yeah, and he answered very well. One more question for all of you, and then I will ask what you. I've always, as I was telling Ricky before we began, I've always in this country had one foot in theater through my education and my professional life, and one foot in the English department. In England, for example, they're a lot more joined, but they can be very separated here. And some of you are, perhaps a little bit more on the theater side. Some of you are, ensconced a lot in the English side. So I don't know exactly what my question really is, except that this play, of course, in our schools is found in both departments, is found in both kinds of courses. How do we, I guess I want to ask, how do we involve, if you can offer any suggestions or tips or experiences, how do you involve the other? In other words, if you're teaching an English course, and if you alluded to some of that, right, with a mention of set design, a mention of acting and everything, but I'm really interested in just really so much cross-pollination. Josh?
Yeah, I was going to mention this and I forgot, so thank you for doing it. So one part of what I was talking about, how sometimes it's really important to diagnose the correct style of the play in order to understand how to read it. And that's really helpful for an English classroom, but for a performing arts classroom, it also is really important for example, actors, to understand that Death of a Salesman lives in not just realism, but expressionism. And if you don't see that, it's going to impact not just how you see and understand, but also how you perform it. And actually, every time I talk about salesmen and expressionism, I bring up a really awesome Arthur Miller conference that we had years ago when Louis Zorich came and presented, and he gave a really awesome conversation about how, and Steve, help me out if I forget anything. Yeah, it was a centennial. And so he was talking about, this is with the 1985 Dustin Hoffman revival. And he was talking about how he was really struggling with the character of Uncle Ben, right? And I think he was approaching it, and this was under the guidance of the director as well, kind of like a King Lear type, very more complex, more fleshed out realism, in other words. And he was not connecting. And Miller was in the rehearsal room, and he was like, "Let me pull you aside." And they went and they had like coffee or lunch or something like that. And he was like, "You have to remember, Uncle Ben is dead. This is all happening in his mind." And at that moment, that's when the actor was like, "Oh, I get it." And then he understood how to perform it. So this is a wonderful. So this is not just academic. So learning what the style of a play is intentional by the playwright. It can help us not just understand how to read it, but also how to perform it, and therefore make it a lot more meaningful and accessible to us.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I wanted to bring something up that happened to me that was very jarring a number of years ago. I was holding auditions for a production, and some students came and auditioned, and then a student stayed behind, and she said, "Can I talk to you, Marla?" And I said, "Of course." So she came in and she said, "I just have a question. What's a play?" And so I said, "Well, I'm not really sure what you're asking, but what she was asking was, what's a play?" She had never seen a play, and she couldn't picture what a play was. And I remember, from my remarks, thinking about my teacher taking me to see plays, and that many students, young people, don't see plays. They don't have an opportunity to actually see a play. So to your question about, the connection between the drama and the English department, the support that students could get these days it's a privilege to be able to go see a play. And, to be able to understand that that's a privilege and to do our best to find ways to support students to be able to go see live theater. If you have never seen it, you can't imagine what it is. And so if you're reading it, it's an experience, and it's certainly a enriching experience, but it's a completely different experience as you described, being in the theater and standing in the back. That incredible opportunity there.
Years before I taught at UConn, I taught English at Albertus Magnus, which was a Catholic women's college at the time in New Haven. And I would look at the schedule for the Yale Rep, Longworth, and the Dramat, the undergraduate. And I would create the course so that I took students, we saw plays, and if there was a script, then we read it.
After you saw.
After. And I was saying to someone yesterday that I don't think plays are written to be read. And we had an interesting conversation with someone there. Byron wrote closet dramas, but generally I always tried, if I had to show a film, and students, when I did take them from UConn, University, the regional campus in Hartford, down to the Yale Rep, they had never seen a play. And what that experience, the aha for them, and the continual aha for me to watch that aha happen. So, and when I was, as I said, at Albertus, that was just a glorious way to create, of course, each semester, what was being shown.
I'll just add something. Yeah, I'm sure that many educators feel the same way, that you come into the semester with this real excitement, right, to the new year. You get to kind of hit rewind and fresh every semester, and you come in with these co-curricular, cross-curricular ideas. And then schedules get in the way, and just, life gets in the way. I'm always interested in trying to connect with our English department and offer opportunities for students to go see plays. And I've been lucky to bring students to Yale Rep every year, as well as over to Hartford Stage. We're going to see Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We saw All My Sons last year, and it was incredible. The hard thing is, and it's one of these things that now with students to go see plays, it's more difficult for them to get there and to commit to go. And I know I sound like an old fuddy, but it's difficult sometimes. Our theater department will cover the costs, and different theaters have really incredible pricing and everything like that. But it is what you're talking about, when they don't get to see a play, and a play needs to be seen, right? And it's tangible, and they can see that, and they can spark their imagination. And it's all of this thing, these ideas of, where they get to see, it's not even seeing themselves so much on stage, but maybe backstage or doing something else. And there's all these opportunities. But in regards to the cross-curricular, it's always a challenge. And I always feel like it's going to be so easy, such an easy, I've got the block free. I'll come and work with you. I'll come and do this. And it just never seems to work out as well as I wish it would. And I'm always hopeful, especially, I love Shakespeare, and I know that a lot of educators are intimidated by Shakespeare sometimes. And I find it so tangible and so accessible. And I love trying to demystify that for students and for the educators themselves. And it's just oftentimes just one of those things that the schedule is difficult. And we also like the autonomy that we have too sometimes. And we want to set our own kind of schedules and our own, how do we want to teach this and unpack this? So that for me is a challenge sometimes. And I'd be love to hear from anybody that's had real success at doing this, recently, especially.
How do you get your funds? We don't have any money, so how do you get yours?
Sure. So I teach at the Frederick Gunn School, which is a private school for 9th through 12th grade. And I do have a theater budget. And I use my theater budget to, Hartford Sage offers $20 tickets. Yale Rep offers $15 tickets for students. That's up from $10. It was $10 for a long time. It's really, really great. So our theater budget picks it up. And I'll put that towards something as opposed to buying, a new hanging mic or gel or something like that. I would much rather have them go see something on a Sunday or a 10 o'clock matinee. And we are in this area, we're 55 minutes from some of the best regional theaters in the country with Long Wharf, Yale Rep, Hartford Stage. You can go up into the Berkshires, Sharon Playhouse, everything. It's really, really pretty fantastic. We sit in this pocket. So at that price, you can put 14 kids in a small bus, and it's, $260 and a chaperone goes for free. So great question though.
Ramon?
Only a footnote. I've read reviews of plays from the 1950s. And one thing that reviewers complained a lot about was the fact that young people did not go to the theater. And I've read reviews from the 1960s, and reviewers complained that young people do not go to the theater anymore. And the same thing is true for the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And the other day I was in Madrid and I went to see a play by Calderón de la Barca. I mean, not precisely someone from yesterday. And the median age was probably 20. I mean, most of the people there were in their 20s, in their 30s. I think I was the oldest person in the theater. And we are talking about a 500-seat theater downtown in Madrid. And this is not an exceptional experience. I mean, I see younger and younger people going to the theater. Maybe I'm wrong, but things that people have been complaining about this for a long time, and I don't know whether it's become like cliche in the theater world to complain about this, the same way that people have been saying that theater is doomed for like 20 centuries, and yet we're still here. So, I don't know.
Let's open up to questions. Yes.
I was intrigued by the professor that was talking about how in India, they often avoid having the word death of a salesman in the title. And I was curious, as you guys start teaching young people, how do you handle the death and the suicide in the play? And how are kids reacting to that, especially in this current moment, at least in the United States, of being concerned about young people's mental health?
Excellent question.
I could take that one for you if you want. So there were 2 years I had to pause on teaching Death of a Salesman because we had tragic deaths in our class community. So after that, we talk about the title right away. And it depends on your audience, like I said, intuitively, coming from an English class, not a theater class. So the students aren't acting out the play. So coming more from just a different perspective, unpacking the title, I make sure I know my kids. I don't necessarily say not to teach the play if someone has a direct visceral experience. However, I think a conversation must be had. So I've had those conversations prior to teaching the play. So it is very raw. And I think back to what I had said earlier, why younger teachers now and public ed aren't really teaching Death of a Salesman that I know of anymore as often as they did because of that.
I'm sorry if my question indicates
Yeah.
that I don't think it's appropriate.
Right.
I think it's actually like out of empathy.
No, you're right. So to something I didn't get to saying was right at the end, I was going to say, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. There's justice in the discomfort of the play. There's justice in it. And if you as a human can't handle it, you can't teach it. You can't teach it. So, you have to be transparent, a professional, but transparent and raw. This is what's going to happen. And the same student who chose to go into Army and confront his father was the same one who said, well, so what's going to happen to Willie? And all his friends looked at him and they're like, dude. And they're like, did you read the title? And he's like, oh my God, and it just kind of broke broke the spell. So I tend to depend on the audience. I say it right away. This is what's going to happen, you know, and if you need help outside of class, I want you to know I'm here, I'm trained, let's go. There's a team of people here to help you because this will bring up stuff for me and you that you might have not looked at for a long time. So, but the person doing it has to be ready. And if you're not ready, this is not the place to start with that readiness of being, you know, transparent or raw in the classroom. I wouldn't recommend starting here. So.
I've never had a problem because the production that we watched at Dustin Hoffman, you don't see anything, so it's almost invisible. Whereas I just finished Indignation by Philip Roth, and I had a student who had to leave, was crying because it's more visible there, the self-harm, but I don't think the production presents a graphic representation of suicide.
Daphne?
Davine, I was
Davine,
just
sorry.
pointing to the woman in back who had a
Oh,
question.
okay, good.
It's interesting, I had exactly the same question, so I'm very pleased that you opened up, because I was kind of baffling. As an educator and teacher, I teach at Yale University, I'm in nursing, and it's interesting, you know, when you talk about light bulb moments or aha moments, or I had an amazing moment speaking or hearing you speak, regarding the fact that this is, I really see the value of having my students see this play or read it or Dustin Hoffman's production of it. And because we do have a mental health crisis going on right now, and I'm just having that light bulb moment of how important this would be to be pulling into curriculum for my students, and being able to talk about it. And although most of my what I do is more women's health and pediatrics, obstetrics, and so forth and so on, I still see we are constantly battling the mental health issues with all of our patients right now, including all of our students. And so I just see the relevance of it. So I've had the people up there who want to have that light bulb moment, you gave me a light bulb moment. And thank you for bringing that up, because it's like, oh, that's spinning a completely different from what we're talking as educators. Like, let's not go into that sort of negative gloom here, but I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it is very relevant. And you answered my question very well of how you do handle it, and everybody's sort of saying, I think, or hearing the same thing, so we do have to be cognizant of the emotions it may roil up. Having only recently another student whose family member committed suicide just within the last week, and how many students have gone down that road. So I think we have to always be aware of that too. I'm sure you always were before, but thank you for my light bulb moment.
So we have two more questions, and I was gonna say, how do I have these two men, you know, fit and happy duke it out for, so we're gonna take both questions to finish, and then I'll have a final.
We'll answer very quickly.
Yes.
My question actually has very little to do with ethical salesman. It's more of a personal interest. A lot of you guys talked about your teaching philosophies, but also some of you have careers in directing and acting that intersect with ethical salesman. So I just wanted to ask about your personal philosophy when it comes to directing students or actors, and your philosophy regarding teaching them to understand the work that they're performing.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. I apologize if I'm a little long-winded, and all of these people on this panel are well-schooled and well-versed in this play. But I approach it, it's a great question. I approach it from an acting standpoint, right? And I do believe it comes down to 101, and I think that's pretty much what we're working on all the time. Right? Your objective. What do you want? What do you want in the scene? How do you try to get it? And what happens when you get it or you don't? Right? And that's pretty much what we're working on all the time. You can use different words, motivation or intention or objective, or you can use tactics or verbs or these ideas, whatever that might be. I really do think it's what's motivating? What are you trying to get? What are you trying to get? And that's what we're doing here all day long, right? We have an objective, and the objectives change throughout the day and everything like that. So for me, that's what I do. I'm a stickler on that. And the students really, it drives them kind of crazy sometimes, right? And that's, for me, that's what it is. So I do think that allows them to try to be active working towards something, trying to affect their scene partners, and using the language, right? What is that language? Language is character. And I think you see that in Death of a Salesman. You see this in great writing from Miller, from Williams, from Lillian Hellman, from Lorraine Hansberry, from Lynn Nottage, right? The text is active, and how do we bring that off the page? So that's how I approach every single class. So thank you.
I would just add on to that because that's all exactly what I would say. But the other thing I would say is look at punctuation.
Yep.
You know, our playwrights write, yes, right? Yeah, right? They write punctuation very specifically. And the playwright tells you the way they want you to speak these words, right? Arthur Miller is a great example, right? When there's an ellipses, when there is a question mark, when there is a dash, we gotta think about what can I do with that? Punctuation is a gift for an actor. I will tell you that.
Can I quickly jump in about the philosophy also? And I'm being a high school theater teacher. I really appreciate that question. And I think to me, it's very important to meet a student where they are, to meet students where they are. And I think to the question about, you know, this particular moment that we're in terms of mental health, I think self-care is really important, and that building that in also as a theater educator. And I think that that's also something that's really bubbling up on the professional level as well, the understanding, the need for self-care for actors. So thank you for that question. Maybe you'll be a teacher.
I'm going to draft them all. And then our final question for this session.
This one's directed towards Ramon. I loved your insight, especially as someone who comes from a background with us all, and like how you point out the differences between European and American teaching. I have a friend was supposed to be in this panel actually, but he got sick, and he's always asking like, how do you know what to write? Like in terms of like an examination, how do you conform to that? And he has trouble sometimes like accepting the fact that conformity is so prevalent in our society. And I was wondering how you kind of look at conformity, especially with the non-conformist ideas about the play, and how like you try to stray away from different topics.
I don't think when you teach this play or any other play, there's like one right interpretation. There are many ways. I was thinking about the question of acting, the characters in the play, which is to me tricky. What do you do with Anchorman? Because I understand about motivation, what my objective is, etc. But what do you do with a character who is merely the figment of someone else's imagination? But I mean, I would not restrict that only to Uncle Ben. What happens with Biff? For instance, I mean, if you ask me about Biff, the character, I don't even know who he is. I don't understand half of the things that he says. He says things that are completely like from Mars, in my opinion. So to what extent is that a real character, or he's also a figment of Willer's imagination? So how can I set a bar for what is right and wrong when the very characters the play is made of are not, sometimes like real characters, but like probably what Willie imagines them to be, or what he would like them to be, or what he fears they are. And the character, rather than someone, is kind of a crucible of all of those things at the same time, right? So you need to be very open when you mark exams on any play, I'd say, but particularly one which is so complex as this one is. And you need to be open to what the student is telling you. And at the very least, merely expect whatever is said to be argued and be told convincingly. I'm open to being convinced by students about whatever they want. So if they do it well, I am going to see anything the way you see it. But you need to convince me. Oh, and you need to entertain me. Because if you bore me, then yeah, you're in trouble.
I wanted to offer one comment, Kent, based on what you were saying, jogged my mind because the three basic questions. And I taught at a boarding high school in Massachusetts a good while ago, and they let me offer the seniors an acting class. So I thought, I'm going to get the top students. And I got the students I had 1 or 2 years before who still could not write a sentence. They couldn't write an essay. They didn't know how to analyze. But once they acted that character, those papers came. So that cross was really nice. I want to make an announcement before I thank our wonderful panel, and that is that Ramon and I and a young man by the name of Alvaro, a new professor at University of Seville, and a number of other people are toward the end of developing a brand new website in conjunction with the Arthur Miller Society, the Arthur Miller Online Learning and Teaching site. And we will have some samples of teaching materials. It'll be a place where people can discuss their ideas, share their ideas, use tips. And so anyone who wants to send me samples so that we can put samples up. So I just wanted to alert that. We're not sure, we don't have a precise date of its launch, but I wanted to make that announcement. And I also want to thank, what a wonderful, wonderful panel. Yes.
I just wanted to say one quick thing in relation to the conversation around mental health. I think that the group of people up here are some of the most important people when we're talking about the arts, because what is art if not a refuge and a space to work out these emotions and these ideas that you can't otherwise express. And it's one of the most important forums for young people or any people to be able to find a voice and to be able to process the stuff that's going on, no matter how challenging, it seems. That's for millennia, right? That's what art is.
Right, and the Greek theater catharsis, exactly.
Yeah, so this is what we need for young people and for students, is we need this.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, so thank you.
Yeah.
I just have
Someone
one
over
thing
here.
to say, and that is, I suppose, an advertisement, okay? If you want to change the world, teach.
I'll field the question.
Sure.